Food wars, inmates fought over what they ate. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. It began with screams echoing through concrete walls. Inside South Carolina's Lee Correctional Institution, trays had run out before everyone in the cafeteria line had been served. Tempers boiled over. Metal tables rattled, plastic forks clattered to the floor, and within seconds, officers hit the alarms. The cafeteria, already tense from weeks of shortages, exploded into panic. Men shouted for water, others demanded their meals, and guards formed a line near the exit, radios crackling for backup. In a prison built to hold 1,500 people, but packed with nearly twice that number, even one missing tray could spark a fight. As officers rushed in, the lights flickered. Smoke from a burning trash bin drifted toward the ceiling vents. The smell of spoiled beans and sweat filled the air. Someone yelled that rival gangs were blaming each other for stealing food deliveries. Then came the unmistakable sound of steel doors slamming shut, lockdown. Cut to silence. Voiceover. By the time order was restored, 7 inmates were dead, and dozens were injured. Officials said the cause was gang rivalry. But survivors told reporters something different. It started with food. That revelation shocked investigators. Could a dispute over prison meals really have fueled one of the deadliest uprisings in modern U.S. history? To understand how it happened, we have to rewind to the weeks before the riot. At Lee Correctional, food deliveries had been inconsistent. Carts arrived half-filled, and staff sometimes served cold leftovers to hundreds of men. Inmates complained of sour milk, undercooked meat, and portions so small they barely filled a plastic cup. The canteen, where prisoners could buy extra snacks, had been shut down after a fight. For many, that tray was the only meal they would see for hours. Former Officer Marcus Hill later said, "We all knew it was getting worse. When people are hungry and feel ignored, they'll fight over a slice of bread." Across America, similar unrest had been simmering. From Georgia to Michigan, prisons faced budget cuts that reduced meal quality and quantity. Some private contractors admitted to using cheaper suppliers to save money. The anger built slowly, until it erupted that April night in South Carolina. The images that leaked afterward, overturned tables, broken serving lines, blood-stained walls, sparked national outrage and investigations into prison food standards. But as the headlines faded, one question remained unanswered. Who decided to cut corners on those meals in the first place, and why were inmates left to starve inside a system meant to control them? In the weeks after the Lee Correctional riot, investigators combed through what was left of the prison cafeteria. The floor was still sticky from spilled food and cleaning chemicals. Broken trays and dented ladles lay scattered under overturned tables. Officials called it the aftermath of gang warfare. But the inmates who survived told a more complicated story, one rooted in hunger, frustration, and neglect. Reporters from Columbia and Charleston began digging into the prison's food contracts. They discovered that the state had outsourced meal preparation to a private company that promised cost-efficient correctional dining. That meant fewer cooks, cheaper ingredients, and tighter budgets. The more meals they made for less money, the bigger their profit margin. One whistleblower, a former kitchen worker named Raymond Cross, later described what he saw. "We got boxes of meat that smelled off. Sometimes we rinsed it, sometimes we just cooked it anyway. We didn't have a choice." He said some inmates noticed and refused to eat, while others hoarded packets of ramen noodles from the commissary for survival. Inside the prison, tension kept rising. Weeks before the riot, 2 cell blocks went without lunch for an entire day because the delivery truck was late. That night, someone started a rumor that one group of inmates had hidden extra food. Fights broke out in the dark, fists, chairs, and shouts echoing down the halls. The Department of Corrections tried to contain the story, issuing short press statements calling it isolated violence. But local journalists began connecting dots. They found records of other protests over food at prisons in Alabama, Ohio, and Texas, each with eerily similar details: spoiled meals, tiny portions, and outbreaks of illness that officials blamed on stomach bugs. By midsummer, lawmakers in South Carolina called for an internal review. A committee visited the prison kitchen. On camera, everything looked clean. But one inspector whispered off record, "They scrubbed it for days before we got here. You should have seen it before." Families of the victims gathered outside the prison gates, holding photos of their sons and brothers. They demanded to know why their loved ones died in a place where they were supposed to be safe. A mother named Evelyn Green told reporters, "He wasn't perfect, but he was human. Nobody should die over a plate of food." Meanwhile, an investigative reporter obtained leaked invoices from the food supplier. They showed drastic price cuts and substitutions: beef replaced by soy filler, milk swapped for powdered mix, and expired products relabeled as usable. As that evidence spread online, public pressure mounted. News outlets ran headlines about America's hidden prison hunger crisis. And just when the truth seemed ready to break wide open, one of the key witnesses, the kitchen worker who had spoken out, was found missing from his halfway house, his bed empty, his belongings left behind. The investigation suddenly took a darker turn. The disappearance of Raymond Cross sent shockwaves through the investigation. He had been one of the few willing to speak publicly about what went on inside the Lee Correctional Kitchen: the spoiled meat, the missing deliveries, the orders from higher up to make do with less. When his parole officer reported him missing, investigators first assumed he had fled. But his sister insisted otherwise. "Raymond wasn't running," she said. "He was scared. He told me people were watching him." 2 weeks later, detectives discovered that the food supply company tied to the prison contracts had quietly shut down its local warehouse. Paperwork was shredded, and several former managers were no longer reachable. Records later showed that the same company held contracts with at least 6 other prisons across the southern United States, all with similar complaints about tainted food and illness. Federal auditors joined the case, tracing financial statements and internal emails. They found that the company had been under investigation once before, accused of overbilling the state and selling expired goods labeled as fresh. Those documents had been buried in administrative files until the riot brought everything back to light. At the same time, the Department of Corrections faced growing backlash. Families demanded accountability. Advocacy groups called for reforms. Lawmakers pressed for hearings. Under pressure, the warden of Lee Correctional resigned, and 2 senior officials in the Food Services Division were quietly reassigned. But the answers everyone wanted, what exactly sparked that deadly night, remained tangled in conflicting testimonies. Some inmates blamed gang tensions. Others swore it began when a fight over missing trays turned violent. What no one denied was that desperation over food had played a role. Months later, the U.S. Department of Justice released its final report. It stopped short of blaming the food contractor outright, but it painted a bleak picture. Overcrowded conditions, understaffed kitchens, and a system that valued savings over safety. The report ended with a single line that echoed far beyond the prison walls: "Neglect creates pressure. Pressure explodes." Raymond Cross was never found. His family still lights a candle for him every April, the same month the riot claimed 7 lives. In interviews, his sister says she hopes his story will force someone, somewhere, to pay attention. Years after the riot, South Carolina began to rebuild its prison kitchens under public management, promising better oversight. But inside many U.S. facilities, similar stories continue quietly. Meals stretched thin, contracts signed in secret, and men fighting over the only thing they can control: what ends up on their tray. The tragedy at Lee Correctional stands as a haunting reminder that sometimes, in a place built on order, it only takes hunger to start a war.